What's good, folks, family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth, to another episode of Disguised Coverage, the only podcast that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin, presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York, and that is One Pie Pizza. Find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. I'm your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro_ANT. Find me on Blue Sky at proant. No underscores there, just PROANT. In this offline recorded edition of Disguise Coverage, we are going to be diving into high-level conversation about scheme and structure and meta in today's NFL, mainly on the defensive side of the ball, tying in some offensive pieces as well, and all putting that against kind of the backdrop or the landscape of where the Buffalo Bills defense fits into that in terms of their identity, their philosophy, their structure, the body types they have, the archetypes they lean into, skill sets, traits, all of that. And as you folks know, we're normally live every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. And anytime we deviate from that schedule, it's usually, not even usually, it's likely and or most definitely due to accommodating a tremendous guest. And with that being said, I welcome to the show Mr. Cody Alexander, creator of matchquarters.com, host of the Let's Talk Ball podcast. If you folks don't know who Cody is, honestly and sincerely, this phrase gets thrown around too much, like the whole ball knower aspect, but you are one of the absolute best when it comes to anything and everything football knowledge, scheme, structure, and absolute go-to for a multitude of people across the space, casually, professionally, and you're also one of the kindest people in the world as well. So I appreciate you taking the time. I'm pumped to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
It's funny, we were talking offline, kind of having this conversation about the Bills defense, because it's been a group that's been questioned so much this year, especially from a run defense standpoint. But they poured all these resources into it in the offseason, and now here we sit the day after they had a pretty good showing against the Eagles. But regardless, we are going to kind of talk about this Bills defense, but within the larger scope and conversation of NFL defenses and where we sit right now, kind of on both sides of the ball. So we'll bring up our first topic here. Cody, I know you love kind of the Matthew McConaughey, Rustin Cole can gif with the whole time is a flat circle. People use that a ton. Time is a flat circle. What is old is new. Let's kind of set the table for this conversation. Where are we now in terms of, defensive meta structure, like where the pendulum has swung? Where are we? How did we get here based on what offenses we're doing and how defenses kind of tried to take the power back recently?
Yeah, so if you're old enough and you remember back to the 90s, okay, so I think this was the last time that we had a collection of quarterbacks kind of similar to what we have today in terms of, I don't know, if again, I'm about to turn 40 here in a couple of days. I remember the quarterback club with John Elway, Troy Aikman. I mean, you got everybody in there, and you would kind of be able to see them, Steve Young, like who's who, right? Warren Moon, like those are the guys I grew up with. And so their era, that was very pass heavy. We kind of forget about the, in an aspect of it, right? Like, if you watch the Elway documentary that just came out earlier, he threw for 25. He threw 25 times. That was a lot. In the 90s, right? Like that's a lot, right? So what you saw was a lot of too, like again, where do we get kind of this match coverage aspect that we have heard? It gets thrown around a lot, especially the Saban, Belichick, Rip Liz match, this match cover 3, the famous quote of if you zone drop against Dan Marino, he's just going to throw darts, that whole deal. So they had to kind of tighten up things. We get this tightening up. We get a lot more cover one. People start beating up receivers at the line of scrimmage. This is where really, to me, we have yet to come out of that. I think we're starting to transition. People don't talk about off-ball and on-ball corners. I know I've talked with you guys before about like Benford being kind of an off-ball, on-ball guy. How does he compare to other corners? So what ends up happening is that we go through this weird period where teams start getting into like the 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Like okay, fine. You're going to run Tampa 2. You're going to put basically a 220-pound linebacker out there. We're going to get into I formation. We're just going to run power. I think where we're at now, because look, the NFL is cyclical. In fact, if you're interested in this, I wrote a book back in 2018 called Hybrids, The Making of a Modern Defense. And I kind of covered the history of defensive football from the advent of motion, which, by the way, was in Cincinnati. Tight end lines up on the wrong side of the ball. He realizes it and right before the snap, moves to the other side. You have the Raiders going from one side to the other, and Bill Walsh looks at his quarterback coach and is like, I think we got something. So, like all of this comes to now. I think where we're at now, though, I call this the post-spread era. And I think it's perfect. Like, if you're like, well, wait a second, we literally just started, and you're correct. We didn't even make it a full decade. Like, you could probably argue 2017 Eagles is really the first spread team to win an NFL Super Bowl. They ran with Nick Foles. They ran a bunch of RPOs. They were out of the gun a lot of times. And then you see 2018, we had the Rams play the Chiefs in basically a basketball game that kind of broke the NFL. You see all the wonkiness in the coverage ratings from 18 to 19 as people are trying to figure this out. We had the too high revolution in 2020, which, by the way, all the old hats, speaking of this topic, all the old hats are telling you, hey, this is 1989 Jim Mora Saints defense. You're right. All these guys are from that era. Dick LeBeau, Dom Capers. I'm going to throw a bunch of old names.
I love it.
Well, the difference now is that the spread won. So the trickle up of the spread and the spacing and the passing and kind of understanding what we're trying to do passing wise and motion now, kind of raising the bar for these. We've kind of gotten to that point now where everybody understands that passing is much more efficient than running. In fact, you can argue probably the first person to realize this was Bill Belichick. I hate to say his name. Is he the name that we don't speak?
Yeah, right. Yeah, he was not the name.
Sorry, I dropped his name. Anyway, the 90s Giants, when they played the Bills and that gun, the fun gun and all that stuff, was if Thurman, the famous quote of if Thurman Thomas rushes for 100 yards, we'll win the Super Bowl. And so that thought process took almost 30 years to mature, but we're there at that point now where we're seeing teams like the Chargers essentially say, we're going to play nothing but nickel and dime. The Rams, where we're going to play almost 40% of our defense in dime, but they're doing it in different ways. And I think what's happened now with the Bills, and that's why I'm on here to talk to you about, is kind of like that meta flip of where we were built to beat the Chiefs and the Bengals, which if you watch, Bengals can't decide if they want to run the ball or not. Dude. Chiefs can't decide. I mean,
look, under center versus shotgun, they're race what they want to do.
Look, I have my buddy Felix who does Let's Talk About Podcast with me. He's a Chiefs fan. I'm from Kansas City, so like I grew up in it, so I keep tabs on it all the time. But yeah, the big deal there is like, can we just get under center and hand the ball off? Like, which is hilarious in 2025. But that's kind of where this evolution has brought us. And it's really flipped really quickly, I think, just because the assimilation of information and I think analytics really being involved within the decision-making, people are now able to kind of realize really quickly when meta shift, when things become efficient, when things become deficient. And so now we get it. But I'll finish with this and then we can go on. But the Rams and the Seahawks are running 12 and 13 personnel at a higher clip than anybody to throw the ball. And if that doesn't answer you where we are in modern football, I don't know what does.
Yeah, the Rams one is so stark, especially with, what are we in 2025? Last offseason. So the offseason going into 2024. Once the Bills traded Diggs, I had already been we saw the metrics and the analytics of a lot of the best offenses in the league were really going condensed formations. And it was the Lions and it was the Rams and the Texans when CJ Stroud had that breakout rookie year. But then you also looked at the body types that like the Rams and Lions had, for example, and they were running all this 11 personnel. And it was like, yeah, they're running 11 personnel and they got good pass catchers, but those dudes can also block their butts off. Like Puka can block and Cooper Kupp can block and Josh Reynolds can block and Amon-Ra St. Brown can block and all these dudes. And it was so funny to see the Rams like be in that world where they could dictate so much out of 11. And here we are 2 years later. And the Rams are like, no, we're just going to do 13. And we're going to do 12. To see them leaning into, and then their run game isn't even the most elaborate. It's just like, well, when we run, we're going to run duo. And then we're going to weaponize the hell out of our tight ends that aren't even like crazy monsters. It's like Higbee and Davis Allen and Ferguson from Oregon, and the way they just attack. And it's so fun to chart that and see that. And I think in relation to the Bills, it's so funny because the Bills last year, they trade Stephon Diggs. And then part of the reason I did that study is because I see, okay, they bring in Mac Hollins, and then they draft, Keon Coleman, and it's moving towards more of these bigger body types at wide receiver. And you've got Dalton Kincaid and you've got Dawson Knox. And my thinking is like, okay, they've seen the league trends, which are condensed formations, bigger body types where you can put defenses into run pass conflict. You can dictate what personnel. You have an 11 personnel grouping you can run out of, but also pass out of. You have a 12 personnel grouping you can run out of and also pass out of. And then the Bills, they have Josh Allen has an MVP year. They have all the success last year. A lot of 6 offensive lineman sets last year where they're kind of leaning into that further. And then this year, they replaced the 6 offensive lineman stuff by drafting Jackson Hawes out of Georgia Tech, who kind of is like an offensive lineman, but obviously can catch and do much more. He's much more viable as a pass catcher. But that notion is still there of kind of having you still want to pass the football, but the run game is a primary table setter. It is your jump off point, or in the Bills' case, an absolute must have where they almost swung the pendulum too far and forgot about receivers on the outside. Conversation for another time. But what I think is so funny with that, especially in relation to the defense, the Bills offense in one offseason last year rebuilt themselves. They went from more of a spread team, chuck it around, to we're going to run the football. We're going to mash you, and not just run it. We're going to run duo. We're going to run at you, like at you type of downhill runs. They remade their offense in one offseason, schematically and body types, to be in line with offensive trends. They built their offense to eat defenses like the one that they currently have. And I think it's so ironic that they leaned into the meta offensively, but kind of stayed away from it defensively and didn't necessarily address it. And you were on with Brett Coleman last week. Tremendous episode. If folks haven't seen that, dive into that. And you said something that you said a ton of things that made my ears perk up, but you said something that I've echoed in similar sentiments. And I say all that and what I just said and say that to kind of set the table for this next topic here. You said, quote, the Bills have a defensive scheme that really isn't built to survive in today's game in 2025. And I think that ties in again to what the offense did, but the defense kind of stayed where it was. Let's talk about that a bit, in terms of what the Bills defense is schematically and how you not even alluded to how you said, they really aren't built to survive in today's game in 2025.
Well, I think it's really difficult to walk away with some of the players that you have on the roster, especially like at certain levels. Like, Bernard is so good when he's healthy as kind of that coverage linebacker. Milano really has been, when healthy, has been good. You get Cole Bishop early in the draft. You're not just going to walk away from him. I think if there's one area where you kind of have lost out, and that's really because you lost 2 big time veterans and you kind of been wandering through the land to try and find that, is it safety. I think you have kind of hit on, a field corner, but you definitely have a boundary corner in Binford. So you look at it like on the back end, you're passing. That's why the passing is so much better with the Bills this year. Is just because they have the guys. Like it's very difficult to find a favorable matchup against the Bills in the back end unless you can kind of maybe pick on one of the safeties. And so what ends up happening for a lot of these teams is they're like, well, we're going to run the ball. And you started seeing this last year, where the Bills for a long time, and really under McDermott, and they will tell you this too, even like Ron Rivera was a long time, where McDermott comes from, was a long time quarters guy for a very long time, kind of one of the only guys running quarters. And that actually tracks historically with Rivera. When he comes to the Bills, he wants to play a lot of too high. Okay. But when he comes to the Bills, it's perfect timing, right? Because the NFL is kind of flipping more to a spread world. Quarterbacks are getting paid $50-60 million. They're not getting paid to be hand off to running backs. We go through the whole deal of like running backs don't matter. They got to have a meeting about getting paid. Like we go through the whole thing.
Cole Kmet is making more than Saquon Barkley, and nobody wants to pay Saquon.
Everybody's like, wait a second. So I think like for what happened with the Bills, you start seeing this last year where they start saying, you know what? Cole Bishop played a lot of down safety and a lot of man coverage at Utah. We know he can do that. Well, what can we do then? We can get him close. Taron Johnson, when healthy, is one of the better nickels. He can fit the run. That's never really been an issue. You can mitigate some of those things, like for overhangs, with some movement inside to get guys in there. The problem that I think you find when you start getting guys like a Von Miller, you start getting guys like a Bosa, they don't necessarily want to dip inside. Right. They don't, that's not their whole deal. I mean, even Von Miller told it, I know that story came out about a couple weeks ago where he was like, I really wanted to go to Denver, kind of be that last deal, but, they don't need a 3-point shooter. They need a guy that can play the full game, right? They need the 3 and the D. They don't need just a guy that's going to hey, go in there, shoot your 10 threes, get us up, and then get out of the game. Like, that's not really what they needed. And so what ends up happening is, like, to answer some of the issues, you just don't have that. I think also too, when you look at this, a lot of the guys that you have inside are what you would call quick threes, right? They're really more pass rushers. Like, even like Ed Oliver, as good as he is, he needs to play on the outside of the guard. Like, and it would be nice sometimes if you could push him out to a 5, kind of like the Chiefs do with Chris Jones. But guys like a Chris Jones or a Quinnen Williams, those guys are very, very rare. And there's even been points with Chris Jones of like, hey, man, we need you to play run defense every once in a while. You can't just swim through and run by and just get trapped every time. Right. Like you can't just pick which days you want. Oh, hey, I got to turn it on this game. Okay, I'm going to stop the run. Like, we need you to be more like Max Crosby and Myles Garrett, where you just are like, I'm going to destroy everything.
Yeah, all the time, no matter what.
It doesn't matter. Run, pass, I'm going to destroy it. It doesn't really matter. And so what has happened is, you're moving more towards under center, which is going to change the trajectory of your inside. Look at all the top defenses right now. Go look at, there's a reason why, Jerry, I'm in Dallas, so I hear this all the time, but like, there's a reason why Jerry Jones is pounding the table and saying we're better off because we got 2 inside guys, right? And really, you could argue they have 3. And so what you look at, Seattle's a great example of this, of where, and then you just played the Eagles, which is another great example of like, when you have 2 inside guys like that, you're changing the math for everybody. You're either creating one-on-ones on the outside for your elite defensive ends, or you're wasting numbers on the inside so that you don't get your lighter linebackers, which you guys tend to have. They don't have a guard or a 330-pound guard in their face every time. Because let's be honest, like, they're not going to win that matchup very often. That's a hard matchup for them. And there's an argument too to be said that the NFL can only take what they get from the college level. And one of the things that you see, one of my good friends, Joey, he's an analyst guy, but he kind of did this deal with NFL draft. And it's just kind of seen how like the weight of the linebacker has gone down. It's like below 250 easily. Like, I think last year they didn't even have, the average was like 231. So they didn't even have anybody like at 245.
Yeah, you've got even like Harold Perkins' first year at LSU, he's this like speedy edge rusher, and then like the next year, like, we're gonna move him to off ball, and it's like he's so small, and that's why like you got CJ Allen in Georgia, who's still kind of built like a monster, and you've got like Hill in Texas, like some of these dudes who can still move, but they're still thumpers. That's such an interesting, I think like dichotomy now, because it's not just all these like spread coverage linebackers, and not everybody has a Fred Warner who's a unicorn and kind of can do whatever.
And like, that's the other thing. Like, you can't, your draft can't be like, well, we'll just draft Fred Warner, or like here in Dallas, like, oh, well, we'll just go have the same draft of Micah Parsons and Osa. Like, we'll get those 2 guys again. Well, that's great, but you're not living in reality. And I think that's what's happened with the Bill scheme. And to your point though, about, look, you have an absolute superhero for a quarterback. Fix the offense first, defense will trail. I think that's kind of the other thing. But I do agree with you. Like, this offseason really needs to have we started running a lot more closed post coverages. We got away from what we were really good at. We moved more to cover 3 to help that. But my argument, and I said this to Brett on the show, is that when you go cover 3, that's great. And yeah, you assume that you have a loaded box right there, but offenses now know that if you're going to play match coverage, they're going to now have RPOs, move guys out, motions are going to move guys. So you really have to be good at playing with a 6-man box. I've been pounding that table now for several years. Everybody that's an old school box count guy, like, well, cover 3 really is 8-man spacing. That's great. But if you're playing match coverage and they vacate, you're playing with 6. So there's no difference between the way that you're playing and a quarters team that's playing. In fact, I'd argue that a quarters team has better options because they have 2 hash safeties.
Yeah.
They can be half players.
Yeah. Especially against a team like the Bills where like it's a quick exit motion and someone's getting pulled and then the quarterback is kind of given that read. So the backside edge is still kind of held. And all of a sudden the numbers that you had just got dropped by 2. And now you don't have that box numbers advantage, even though you're in single high and even though you're in it to have numbers in the box and stop the run.
Right. And so what you end up doing is you basically developed a defense that goes horizontal really well. And then what's happened now is teams are, and you've already mentioned, you said duo like 3 or 4 times already in this deal. So it's like, what is duo? It's downhill. It's basically power without a pole, right? So then you start adding in, you mentioned the Rams. The Rams are running a ton of gap scheme. And so like gap just means you're pulling your alignment, you're creating an extra gap. Well, when you're light, that now exacerbates your problems because what you're finding out is that, okay, they're running at us. We can't get game control. I think you guys in the Chargers are really kind of in this weird spot where we're elite at the pass, but we're not very good at the run, where I think the Chargers are a little bit ahead of you just because they've got Derwin James. And I think Tier Tart it's kind of an understated nose. And kind of where they are right now, their edges are really just really good at defending the run. And so you kind of have this where they're kind of about middle of the road, but they give up almost 4.5 yards per carry. I just wrote about it on Match Quarters, kind of like he's basically, if there's one unique defense, what's funny is like, not the Vikings. The Vikings are just wild. That's an outlier. They're on a completely different planet. He's playing a different game than everybody else. But like, if you just want to look at around the NFL, who are the unique defenses? You have the Lions, who don't want to do anything other than base. And then you have both LA teams running nothing but light packages, but they're doing it in 2 completely different ways. The Rams are doing it with 5-man front, and then the Chargers are doing it with 4 down, but they also have an alien at nickel. So it's kind of, and then you could argue too, like the other one is probably the Texans, who are just, I call them the ass whooper defense, because it's like there is no scheme. It's just we run nickel wide 9, we play cover 3 man and quarters.
It's just like, hey, so here's what you're going to do. You can try and block our guys on the front. And it's not just Anderson and Hunter, who are both assassins. They've got guys like Autry can move, Rankins can move, 72, whose name I always screw up, is good against the run. Like Derek Barnett is pulling out spin moves and ice picking dudes to death. And it's like, good luck with the front. And then I hope your receivers can beat Derek Stingley and Kamari Lassiter. And then To'o and Al-Shaair are just flying around ready to take people's heads off. And yeah, it's so fun with them because there's nothing schematically like creative. It's very much just like, we're going to beat the hell out of you and good luck trying to beat us. And that's it.
It is the old, like every old hat it's just like nodding their head. Yep. Just run and hit, tackle good, fundamentals, defeat blocks. Football's not hard. You young guys make it difficult. The Texans are like every old man's team. They're like my dad's favorite team, right? It's like they just want to see that. And so like to go back to the Bills though, like that's kind of where the Bills are in between. They're trying to figure out, they played more base than they've ever played this year. And I think that's part of it. They played more cover 3 than they probably ever played.
Played way more dime than they ever have too, because they're trying to find an identity as well on passing down and distances.
So it's just kind of like that mixed bag. I really think you need a nose at some point, whether it's going to be a shift to where you can walk. The big trend right now in 4 down is just having a guy that you can walk down. I don't think you have a linebacker right now that you feel comfortable walking down that can play an edge.
Yeah. It's so funny with so many the things you said. I'm very happy that you have aligned with a lot of my thinking. But it's just funny seeing how they've built or I shouldn't say built, to your point, like, okay, to address the offense first, but then they put so many resources into the defense. And the one that still gets me, and you mentioned it right away with the nose, like They take Max Hairston in the first round. And then in the second round, they take TJ Sanders. They trade up for TJ Sanders. And then they take Deion Walker from Kentucky in the fourth, who, even though Deion Walker is a mountain of a man and has played much better run defense this year than I ever would have given him credit for, he was still a mountain of a man that played a finesse kind of penetrating game. At Kentucky, he's lining up anywhere from a 0 all the way up to like a 5 and sometimes wider than that, but more as a rusher. He's a rusher. He's a penetrator. They've used him more as a one tech this year because they've had to. And again, he's shown up better than I thought he would. But according to Tyleik Williams, defensive tackle from Ohio State who went to the Lions, he says that the Bills told him if he was there at the end of round 1, the Bills were taking him. So I hear that after night 1, and I'm like, oh, they are going to go for more of like the one tech. Like they are going to go for a little more size, but more of that skill set, that trait, more, displacement mitigation and kind of body eater. And so then they trade up in the second round, and I'm like, oh, is it going to be for Alfred Collins from Texas? Like he doesn't give you much as a rusher, but okay, space eater, people eater. It's like, no, TJ Sanders. And then Deion Walker. Also, we signed Larry Ogunjobi in the offseason, and everything is just so like lean into the threes, like quick threes, like you said. It's all like 3 tech pieces. And then even Daquan Jones, who's their starting 1 tech coming into the year, it was going to be him next to Ed Oliver. They've both been banged up. But Oliver goes down. They start putting Walker more at 1. They have Daquan Jones play the 3, and Jones is sweet at it. Why? Because he was a 3 everywhere else he was. So even like their starting 1 tech is still more of a 3. And I don't think that's necessarily terrible in and of itself. And Brandon Beane's on the record saying it a bunch. Like they value inside rush, and those are the guys that get paid more, and it's harder to find inside rush. And I get that. But constructing your interior defensive line solely out of those guys, and also having smaller linebackers and a smaller nickel in Taron Johnson, even though Johnson's awesome, but he's been banged up this year, like you alluded to, it just creates this spine where you have guys who struggle to get off blocks, struggle with block deconstruction. And that's part of why they're historically bad this year for yards after contact. Mm-hmm. They're not terrible with yards before contact. They're not getting blown off the ball, but they're getting moved and they're not getting off blocks. So they're just able to get arms or shoulders. And then you add in struggles from the second level when Taylor Rapp was coming down earlier in the year, or Cole Bishop was coming down earlier in the year. And then I think the single high stuff is so funny that you mentioned, funny in a bad way, because coming into this year, the safeties were going to be Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop. And Taylor Rapp, if he's your single high post safety, he's got some of the processing. He doesn't have the wheels. He doesn't have the range. He doesn't have the foot speed. If Cole Bishop is in the post, he's got the range and the athleticism, but he's still working out his angles. He's still working out his processing, because him and Sione Vaki, the other safety at Utah a couple years ago, were some of the most fun dudes to watch, but they were more like big nickel monster men apex, where they were all in and around the box and line of scrimmage, matching with tight ends, running backs, blitzing. That's where Cole Bishop's at his best. He's developed the farther he's gotten from the line of scrimmage this year, made some plays. But then it was like, okay, you're getting run on. You don't have the spine to mitigate the run. Then you also have to walk a safety down, and you're putting one of those safeties in the post, and neither of your safeties are built to live in the post. And then, and you mentioned this with Brett, you're playing single high, but then some of their gap integrity was poor. So now they're getting gassed when they're in single high. They don't have that extra third layer to help them out. Then you're pairing it with a single high safety that's coming off the top, who's not taking a proper angle. And all these things start compounding, and it leads to a spot where I understand the Bills' philosophy, and it ties into everything you've said so far, which is still, like, even though the run is a primary piece, limit the pass. The pass is still kind of number one. And the Bills, they want to limit explosives. Nothing gets behind us. That's why they went with 2 high coverages so much for years. But you can be that way. You just can't be like completely awful versus the run. Yes. And that's what they've been. Like, it's the pendulum swung so far. And that kind of leads into like my you mentioned it a bunch, but like kind of the next topic with it that I want to get into here. And it ties into the Bills, like kind of the ideal body types or skill sets or traits you need to have defensively today. Cause I think so much of, like, I think the nickel position, because of the spread and how the game started to move, true nickels, and everybody started moving to nickel, but like true nickels who could fit the run and play coverage became so valuable. Like Mike Hilton in Cincinnati, Kenny Moore in Indianapolis, Taron Johnson for the Bills. But now you're starting to get true like 12 personnel, true 13 or true 21 or 22. And if you're not able to match that with the run, teams are going to mash you, even though they still can pass out of it. And now they're using personnel to dictate so much to defenses, and situation is coming into play. And I think the Bills and all of it are kind of like you said, caught in this in between where they don't have the body types or the scheme to kind of hang with the run because everything is so, 4 down over front, one gap penetrating. We might get a tackle for loss, or you might gash us for 15 yards, and we'll play that risk and reward type of strategy, which has worked for them in the past. But just with where the game is going, it's so questionable for them. And so I kick it to you now, like the ideal body types, skill sets, traits to have defensively. I'm going to say this multiple times as we go through these next topics. Like, there's no one right way to build a defense. You've mentioned it several times already. Like, defenses get into similar results differently. But when you look at certain body types or skill sets or traits that NFL defenses should have now, what are they? Where are they? Like, what do you think is premium or priority to kind of allow defenses to counter what offenses have kind of done now to take some of the power back?
Well, I'll start probably the team just in terms of just stylistically are similar is probably the Chargers. And so what's the biggest difference between the Chargers and you guys? And I think it's a little bit more of they have bigger bodies inside. I mean, last year, Puna Ford and Tier Tart were in there the entire time. Anytime they were in nickel, they had two noses. Now, you're not going to get a pass rush. And so, again, I think it goes back to GMs have beliefs in systems. And like you said, they value, and you can tell this because the whole roster is this way. They really value interior pass rush.
Yep.
And so at the end of the day, though, you have to start thinking, okay, well, we need to add a guy that on early downs or when we need to play base, we can put a nose and he can just sit on top of the center. And you don't have to necessarily get into a bare front or a 5-man front. You can do different things to do that. You can walk a guy down, which I think, again, goes back to what's kind of the new trend that we're seeing. I mean, you just saw it really in the Eagles where Bond and Jihad Campbell can both walk down to the edge. Yep. Now, Bond a lot of times is I call him a grab me player. He's going to grab a tight end to the flat. He's going to grab a running back to the flat. He's not really a pass rusher. He's there more to change the structure. He can hold up if he needs to on the edge. You're not necessarily going to put him on a tight end. I think you have to have rooms within a rooms nowadays. Like, you almost have to have, like, I need a big 5. I need a guy. I think Bosa can transition into this. I think, like, as he gets older, I see he could easily become like a DeMarcus Lawrence, of where I just look, man, I'm an immovable object because I'm an absolute alien of a human being. And I want to rush the passer, but I also understand that that's kind of like too far gone for me. I still think he's pretty good at rushing the pass, but I think we're long gone I don't think we're going to see an 18 sack season out of him.
Yeah.
Just you know what I mean? Especially
he's not prime Dallas Cowboys DeMarcus Lawrence, but you can still send him inside to pick someone or spike the hell out of something or beat the hell out of a tight end or a tackle and let some of their other fast flowing dudes, especially the second level, but even the interior, kind of do work alongside with what he provides.
Well, and imagine him versus a tight end. Like, line him. I mean, I think for him to be a big 5, and then you find a way, you really need a linebacker. I love Bernard. I'm a Baylor guy, as you know. So I'm a huge Bernard fan. The 2021 Baylor team is still one of my favorite teams of all time. Well, because it had Petrie and him on it. They literally could do anything that they wanted. And so I think the problem is like, I don't want to line him up on the line. I don't think Matt Milano is built to line up on the line either. I don't think that's his skill set. I think he's a box backer. I think he's a coverage linebacker. So you have 2 coverage linebackers. You really need to either have you need to go get a Georgia linebacker that really knows how to blitz the A gap. Like, I don't know what it is, but they all tend to just really be able to, they got a guy with the Eagles. They got a guy with the Packers that kind of are the same dude and they can do the same things.
Fair.
Then you have a guy that I think like a Jihad Campbell. One of the things with him coming out, people couldn't figure out what they wanted to do. Yep. So there were teams that just didn't draft him or didn't even have him on the board because they didn't think that their team had a plan for him. Right. But I think that you can there's really nothing to go from a G front where our nose, which is what a lot of times what the Bills play, which is a nose on the guard, to a shade nose, move that guy like a Bosa maybe in from a 5 to a 4-eye, and then just go walk a guy down. Or even some of the guys that you have, I mean, it's nothing to go play on the outside shoulder of a guard or the inside shoulder of a tackle, kind of get wide or head up on a tackle to really protect that guy, and then be able to get some into 5-man spacing things. 5-man spacing is not great, though. A lot of the coaches who were really high in it, like you can see Vic Fangio's kind of moved away from it. The one team that has not, though, is Shula. And the reason why is because he's a Wade Phillips guy at heart, and he wants to run a 5-man front. And who's the best 5-man front probably is the Denver Broncos. So it's like that. Those are the same tree guys. So imagine like the Fangio back end with a Wade Phillips pass rush, and that's what you have with the Rams. And I think you have with the Bills. You just need to find a way to get some sort of a workhorse inside. Don't go break the bank. If for whatever reason, oddly, a guy like a Quinnen Williams falls to you. The problem with the Bills too is they're always going to be in the back third of the draft. So the premium big guys, God doesn't make a lot of those guys. And that's why they go at the top of the draft, just because when you can get a guy like that, you draft them, because there just aren't a lot of guys like that. And so I think that you need to find, though, you can easily find a workhorse. And I think that's what you got to find. You need to find you like an Andrew Billings guy, another Baylor guy, but like a guy.
I was just saying, another Baylor guy.
I remember, I watched the Bears play the 49ers last night, and it's like I always remember, like, oh yeah, that's big. That's big Billings. So like you need a guy like that can waste. Like if the teams want to get big on you, you can answer that.
Yeah,
he's not playing 60 snaps. He's playing more like 25, 30 snaps for you. You're keeping him fresh, but you're taking him out on third downs. You got the third down package. Yeah, that's not the problem. The problem right now is how can we win early downs? And like you said, the difference between you and the Chargers is that the Chargers aren't giving up explosives. Yeah, they're giving up 4.5 yards a carry on gap scheme, but they're not giving up the chunk plays that the Bills are, which are backbreakers. Any explosive play in the run game is a backbreaker, because that's not bend, don't break. And I know that that's a dirty word, and people don't want to, I know fans don't want to hear that at all. But that to me is the thing, though, is like you're making them play more downs, which is going to give you more opportunities to get the ball in your hand. They're going to make a mistake. They're going to have a false start. They're going to have a procedure penalty. They're going to have a holding. And so the more plays you make and you keep them going down, then the longer that's going to last. And then you're going to have opportunities to get them in the hole.
Yeah. And that's when Leslie Frazier was the Bills defensive coordinator. Like, he and McDermott were on that page as part of why they wanted to put a cap on everything. It was like, because we want you to have to go 8, 9, 10 play drives, because we think you're either going to make a mistake, like you said, or we're going to get a sack, or we're going to get a tackle for loss. We'll get you behind the sticks. We'll create an advantageous spot for us, and we'll get there. And now it's been like that's kind of still their mindset, but they're giving up like 8 yards, 15 yards, 20 yards, 7 yards, 16 yards. And to kind of further your point there, the Bills have given up the second most runs of 10 or more yards this year with 65. The Chargers are 15th in the league at 48. So almost 20 less, which is a crazy amount of difference. The only team worse than the Bills in explosive runs given up is the New York Giants. And they've just been an absolute fire on that side of the ball. Overall. Yeah, it's the Giants. Like, you don't want to be in that. You don't want to be in any conversation where it's like you and the Giants. It's like, that's not a fun conversation.
Any team you guys are the only good team in New York. Any other team, like, let's stay away from those.
Yeah, stay away from the Jersey teams. Yeah, the New Jersey teams, they are no good right now. You don't want to be associated with that. And you mentioned a lot of like the conversation about linebacker, and the Bills, they moved some of Matt Milano's money around. And so it looks like he's probably not going to be here next year, but they locked up Bernard for the foreseeable future. They've got Dorian Williams. Shaq Thompson has been a revelation for them this year and been their best linebacker, in part because Bernard has been hurt, though Milano is coming kind of back on a little bit. What do you see for like the linebacker position going forward? Because you said it on one of the Let's Talk Ball podcasts that I was checking out recently, of kind of like how the linebacker is like the defensive version of the running backs don't matter thing, where everybody kind of forgot about the linebacker. Like, what do you see now, especially with how much the run is becoming a primary thing for offenses and personnel and dictation and everything offenses are doing? What do you see for linebackers kind of going forward? Is it like, hey, we got to get bigger. We got to get dudes who can thump a little bit. And then tying into something you mentioned earlier, like, where do you get that? Because so much of the college game isn't building those guys like that. They are building more of like kind of the spread type of linebackers. Like, where do you see kind of what the future of the linebacker position, how much it matters, and the type of like body types, teams need at it?
Well, I think like staying in the division, like the Chiefs are a great example of like they found a guy that can line up on the line of scrimmage, They found a really good coverage guy in Tranquil. I mean, there's clips of Tranquil in the deep half as a safety, right?
Oh
And
my
then
God. I remember that last year clipping stuff where I'm like, 23. I'm like, that's Tranquil. Yeah, he's playing split field safety. I'm like, what the hell is going on? It's so cool. Yeah.
Right. And now, Bernard could probably do that. Not saying, and that's not really in their style. Spags has to do just the most bizarre stuff. I think he's calmed down this year just because the defense just hasn't been there. But you go with Bolton, and Bolton's a true Mike backer.
Yeah.
Now, he can guard a running back if you need him to, but he's really kind of a B2B player. He's not really supposed to be outside of the C gap. And I think so I think that's a good example there. I think a lot of the linebacker, like I really think there's a lot of teams that would love to have the Lions linebackers. Now, I don't like a defensive scheme that it lives on a razor's edge. Basically, what that means is if all 11 are healthy, we're really good. If all 11 aren't healthy, we're not very good.
We're screwed.
That's not a good scheme to me in an 18-week season.
Yeah.
And so I think what you need to do is, like I mentioned earlier, like the room within a room, you have a big five, you have your rush ins, your drop ins, your edges, right? You have a defensive ends and you have edges, you have three techniques and you have noses. Yeah. I think even at the linebacker spot, you need to have a B2B player. You need to have an outside the box player. I think Bernard is perfect will linebacker. I think that's the guy that you need to have to the boundary. Let him play in the will. But you also have, I think, like you just played a team that's a great example of this again, of two. It's like, okay, well, you have Nakobe Dean, who is a Georgia linebacker, right? I mentioned him. Yep. Really good blitz in the A gap. Yep. He's a B2B player, right? You have Zach Bond, who is a great coverage linebacker, can give you some edge presence if you need it, but that's not really his game. He can line up at Mike if you need it. And then you have a guy like a Jihad Campbell, who is really your hybrid guy. He can line up at the edge. He can play coverage if he needs to. And so I think you kind of need those three spots. You even look at kind of like what the Lions, I just brought them up. Yeah. Barnes. Not a lot of people talk about Barnes. Barnes makes it so that they can run that 3-4. He's the old school. I'm gonna drop another old school for you. The Ted linebacker, right? Why is it Ted linebacker? Because it has a TE in it. Where do you think he lines up? On the tight end, right? So you have the Ted linebackers back, right? So he lines up on a tight end. He can guard a back out. You have Anzalone, who is a great coverage backer. Yeah. And then you have Jack Campbell, who is an A-to-A player. If he needs to rush a running back, if he needs to cover a running back into the flat, you're not really worried about that. You're not asking him to cover a tight end. But you start looking at some of these teams. Why are the Jaguars so good? Well, they kind of have a front structure that they've got the guys. They have every type of body that you need. They have a tackling just guru in Olakong. And then you have Lloyd, who is just kind of this freak, like passing line, like coverage linebacker. So they have both of those guys, right? And so like you start looking around at some of these defenses that are really good, and you're like, wait a second, they have pretty good linebacker play. Look, I'm a big Broncos fan. One thing that scares me is anytime that those linebackers have to get in coverage. So that's why do you think we play so much man coverage?
Dude, I was thinking that I dove into I watched a bunch of Broncos this year, but I really dove into Packers Broncos and then Jags Broncos. And especially from the Packers game, like one of my takeaways was like Greenlaw and Singleton in coverage, or like I mean, and also too, like, no disrespect to them, like I'd rather go there than like anywhere Pat Surtain is, or having to deal with the front. And like Riley Moss probably doesn't get the credit he deserves because everybody throws at him because they don't want to go with Pat. But like, yeah, like you can get Greenlaw and Singleton, but granted, teams are going to go there anyway because they're sick everywhere else. But yeah, 1,000%. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So you can see like there's some outliers, but that whole defensive unit is really good and it kind of carries them, right? Look at why did the Rams get so good this year? Well, they signed a guy named Landman. Oh my God. Yeah. And so I'm also a Colorado Buffs fan, so I know who Landman is, right? So when you're like, wait a second, that guy was just a regular dude with the Falcons, and then he comes in, and it's like, yeah, but he's an A player. He's an A to A, B to B player. That's all they need. They got a 5-man front. They just need you to plug a gap.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep.
And two, just watching before we came on, I mean, he made a couple really nice plays taking on guard. So, that's the thing is like, I need that guy that can play B to B. And so you start looking at some of these teams that are really good and you're like, okay, this is a good scheme. I like what they're doing. And it's like, well, yeah, that's because they've got, they kind of have every body type that you need. The argument, if you're sitting there like, yeah, but the Chiefs weren't really good. You're right. They don't have any pass rush on the defensive line outside of Chris Jones. But those linebackers, you can't get to, if you run the ball to the second level, guess what they are? They're really good at stopping the run. They're just not that great at pass just because just the personnel. So you start really looking around and you're like, well, how can we fix this? I think that there's ways, and I do think that there's a market deficiency in linebacker. I think that you can get really good linebackers as long as you don't please don't pick up Kenneth Murray from the Cowboys when they don't
get how
him.
I really thought once Logan Wilson came in, I was like, okay, that's it. Like Overshown's coming back and that's it. And then like Murray just keeps getting work.
There's a rumor that's Eberflus digging Jerry Jones. That's
okay.
If you remember, Mike McCarthy didn't play Mingo because he wasted a 4th round pick. This is kind of one of those like, I'm just not going to play your new toy because you go troll me on. Dude, Dallas is so messy. Yeah, I know.
So like messy.
I live in Dallas, so I hear all the mess. So if I bring up the Cowboys too much, I'm sorry.
No, I love it.
At least we haven't talked about Dak's legacy yet. So, it hasn't become a full football show yet.
Oh my God. Yeah. The Dak Prescott discourse is always so what did I clipped, I was watching some of I forget, everything's blended together. The Thanksgiving games, Christmas games, all that. But I think it was the Christmas game when he hits Cavante Turpin on that beautiful ball, off Washington runs like the Tampa 2 robber, Tampa 2 invert, however you label it. Beautiful ball to Turpin. And I clipped it. I was like, this is one of my favorite coverages. The team's playing. Dak just beats it with a gorgeous ball, perfectly in stride. And I had so many people were coming in and were like, Dak's so overrated. Dak sucks. And then other people that were coming in and were like, teach tape from Dak Prescott. And it's always just so like,
oh yeah, no, there is no, you either love him or hate him. That's the whole thing. So
it's so crazy.
Yeah, no, it's a mess. But to go back to the point, sorry, I got us up on a.
No,
on a
I love it. And I don't care. I have no problem too. And I also got a buddy too who covers the Lions, who's always talking to me about Derek Barnes, and he's going to be so happy with this conversation.
Okay, good. Yes, because he is. If you are a Lions fan, you love him. But if you don't, you probably have you're like, who is that? That's 55 for the Lions. Yeah. He's pretty good. You won't ever notice him because he does a lot of the dirty work. I think transitioning to the secondary, I love the Hairston pick. I think I talked to you guys in offseason 2 during the draft. And I was like, I think this is a great pick. He's long, athletic. It's going to take him some time. Yeah. That's a perfect field corner for your Benford boundary corner. And if you're sitting here like field boundary, I thought the NFL plays in the middle field. You're right. But a lot of these defensives now are kind of going a collegiate style where you're having really kind of the nickel play to the field. You're having the passing strength, depending on how you want to call it. So you have a guy that goes with the nickel hand in hand, and then you have a guy that goes with your will linebacker hand in hand. And so Benford's a great boundary corner because he can play man, he can press, he can get off. And I think they've done a great job of weaponizing him recently, just with some of the pressures and some things. I thought the Bengals game was a great example of that. And so I think you've got that. I think Cole Bishop is going to be a great hybrid safety. So I think if you're looking into the future, you probably need to go get a B2B linebacker, a box linebacker. I think you need to find, you got to go find a safety, and you got to decide what you want to do with Cole Bishop. Do you want him to play near the box primarily, or do you want him to play in the post? I think you want hybrids. That's a pipe dream. Every coach will tell you we want to teach left and right. Yeah. And I think when you get guys, the Broncos were like that under Fangio. They had the two that could do it, like is with Simmons and like you could do both of them could play the box, whatever. That's a pipe dream. You're never really gonna. I think the Packers could probably do it. The Packers actually do that a lot. Is with McKinney and Williams. Either one can play down, and so that again is not realistic. So you need to find a guy with a post skill set or a box skill set, and then that way you can just kind of rotate that way on early downs. And then on third down, obviously you want to be able to play it. But I think body type wise, that's what you should be looking at in the offseason.
Very fair. I also like that because it echoes a lot of what I've said about Cole Bishop. I appreciate the progress that he's made, playing better the farther he's gotten from the line of scrimmage, especially as a single high guy, but even in 2 high structures, he's gotten better at some of his angles and positioning. But yeah, I want him as a big nickel monster man, apex type of dude, live in and around the box. I would love to pair him with more of a traditional free safety. And I don't want them completely isolated where it's like,
Yes.
yeah, the free safety can never come down, but having more of that where, yeah, going back to like the Bills are a great example too. Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, where either like they were at the forefront of that. It's no more free and no more strong. It's just two safeties. Granted, Hyde was a little more free and Poyer was a little more strong, but you could take both and box, split field, single height, didn't matter. They could do whatever. But it's so hard to get guys like that. And I think Bishop has done enough in showing progress as like a single high safety and a deeper coverage guy that he can live there. But I still want him in and around the box, playing top down, coming forward. And if they could pair him with a true free, I think that would be so fun and exciting for them. And kind of, tying into, so we talked about the body types and skill sets and traits to have defensively. Schematically, again, a lot of ways to skin the cat. There's a multitude of ways you can be good. There's no one right way to build a defense, build a team, yada, yada. What do you think are some schematic principles that defenses need or should have today? It could be anything from front structure to coverage structure towards identity, philosophy, anything and everything. Just some principles or things that defenses should hang their hats on in today's NFL.
I think just being multiple. I think that's really the key now is that that's why I think a lot of times like the Vikings and the Browns are outliers in the sense that they don't really do much. Like the Browns, you kind of have an idea. You're going to get a 4-3 cover one. They will sprinkle in some Tampa 2 stuff as a changeup. They'll play some cover 3, obviously. That's the king coverage in the NFL. Yep. But you kind of know down to down what you're going to get. And I think like the Vikings, okay, we're going to get about a 50% blitz rate. We're going to get the all up on the line. They're going to play a lot of zone coverage. We kind of know that going in. Right. But I think if you look at kind of everybody else, the entropy or like the diversity that you see is really high. I do like a kind of an index, like on my stat site. I do like each week I'll do like a coverage entropy, like how diverse are you, and then rate it.
Yeah, it's awesome. Those graphics look great. They're so colorful and they highlight everything.
I appreciate it.
With the spider charts and how everything goes. Yeah, that's awesome stuff.
Well, the point to that is like we're still at like most teams are close to 80. I mean, like most teams are doing a lot. And so I think how that's kind of changed how teams go about. I think like the static nature of it. I go back to Dallas again when Zimmer was there. Everybody was really excited because the double A gap pressures and he's going to run some different things. It's not just going to be cover 1 and trap 2s with like Quinn was. And it's like, yeah, but then he doesn't move. So it's like if I give you 2 safeties and the corners are also off, I know it's cover 4. If the corners are kind of pressed up, I know it's cover 2, right? You rotate, I know it's cover 3. So it's like you knew what it was. And I think a guy like you're finding out that some of these rotations, I know I've talked to you guys, multiple guys from you guys that have talked about like more simulated pressures. We're dropping defensive ends. We're doing some different rush patterns. Pivoting to more of a cover 3 team is another kind of maturation process of like, hey, we've got to change. And I think like when you look across, like you mentioned, there's no one way to do it. Look, I think everybody would love to have the Rams D line. If everybody had the Rams D line or the Broncos D line, they play 5-man fronts. I think the Vikings are the same way. Why do they play so much 5-man front? Well, I think everybody would like their defensive line. So it's like, that makes sense. Then you go to the Texans and you're like, well, they don't really run a lot of 5-man fronts. Well, yeah, but they've got guys all right. They don't have to, and their linebackers are good enough that they don't have to. So I think like it's all stylistic, but I think what you're seeing now is that you can't really go small. I mean, or you can't really go too big.
Yes.
I think the Lions are a great example of we try and run everything out of base. But we can only do that if both of our all-pro safeties are on the field at the same time. And when they're not, our man coverage stuff, because you have to play a lot of man because you cannot let those guys – I mean, you're not going to look – I love Anzalone. He's a great coverage guy. I'm not going to put him on the slot. You can't go 11 personnel, and I'm going to put you on the slot. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to let you move around and let that guy get into a slot.
Yeah.
So you have to mitigate that with personnel. And so I think what you're seeing is – I don't think you have – it's not we need to blitz more. It's not we need to have a 3-4 instead of a 4-3 or a 4-3. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of 4 downs are trying to get to 5-man fronts one way or the other just to change up the structure. Just so, again, it goes into you have to be multiple, which is going to change the way that you teach. I think when you compartmentalize things, You start using interchangeable parts. I think a lot of these defensive coordinators are kind of reevaluating how they're calling, how they're going through things. No, I don't think enough is talked about that when you get past the 45, close to the 50, that your third down is not third down anymore. That's a second down. And so you're changing the way that you're calling, because fourth down isn't fourth down anymore. It's almost like a 3rd and 5, right? You got to treat it like that, because teams are going for it on 4th and 5. Well, what does that mean, right? What does a 3rd and 10 and it's on the 40 or it's on the 45, 50? That changes the way I do that. I need to have more tools in the toolbox. I think that sometimes you get in trouble, where Swartz dealt with this last year, where you get too many injuries. Your secondary man coverage is volatile to begin with.
Yep.
It didn't hit last year. It's hitting this year. Will it hit next year? No one knows, right? So it's like you get into these things. So what I think is, we're a zone. I think if you look at what the NFL meta is right now, it's zone based. It's still leaning cover 3. I think more teams are using cover 2 because it's simpler, and I can change the parts a lot easier. I can change the look much easier than if I just run quarters. I also think that not everybody knows how to run quarters. And I know that that sounds crazy, but there's a big difference between cover 4, the Madden coverage, and quarters, which is what we see. And what if there's one thing I can say I'm an expert at, which is not much, but I do know how to run quarters. I do know how to run quarters. I promise, and all the rules to it. So it's like that. You have a match quarters, the cover 4 stuff. There's a lot of coaches in this league that did not grow up in trees that actually know how to run quarters. And you start saying palms, right? So that's 2 read, where the corner takes a flat. A lot of guys don't know all the rules within that. What are the problems to solve? Remember, your playbook could be as simple or as complex. It doesn't matter. If you don't know the answers to the test, like if you don't know the things that or how people are going to attack you, and then the answers and the pivots off of them, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. Okay, we saw this. I mean, look, I'm a Broncos fan. There's a reason why we gave up 70 points to the Dolphins, because we were trying to run Fangio coverages with a Wade Phillips guy. It doesn't work, right? Like, the defense got much better. Yeah. So it's like, you start seeing, like, just because somebody's doing it doesn't mean I need to do it, because if I can't teach it, it really doesn't matter. I think the best example of like an amalgamation of like the best schemes is Campanile. Go look at him. He worked for Fangio. Man. He worked for Flores. He worked for Saleh Halfley. What are the 3 top schemes outside of the Ravens? The only person he didn't work for is like the Ravens.
Yeah.
Like a Ravens.
Crazy, yeah. And that Jags defense is there's so much talking for Bills fans. It's like, oh, who are we going to play in the first round? I don't think Bills fans, if they play the Jags, are prepared for what the Jags defense is from a schematic standpoint.
So this is so funny. Danny Heifetz is a good friend of mine for The Ringer. He does the Ringer podcast. And he randomly was texting me one day. It's probably like a month ago. And he was like, what's the one team you don't want to see in the playoffs? And I said, the Jacksonville Jaguars. He laughed at me. And then I go to I was for my birthday, my wife had me and my dad go out to the Broncos games. She got me tickets to the Broncos Jaguars games. And he's like, how ironic that you had to prove your point by going to the Broncos.
That's hilarious.
Watch them lose to the Jaguars. I was like, irony. But
dude, yes. Yeah, the painful irony.
Yes. God, but I'm like, hilarious. See, and I was texting during the game. I was like, see what I mean? This is why I said this.
I don't think people aren't in. So Trevor Lawrence, I think, is another one too, similar to kind of like the Dak Prescott discourse. But so much about the Jags is always like, oh, Trevor Lawrence, and like good Trevor, bad Trevor. Oh, he's so overrated. I can't believe some people have him as a top 10 quarterback, and then even like this year too, it was a little like, oh, is Brian Thomas Jr. scared to go over the middle? Like, what are they? But all of that overshadows what they do schematically, and some of the horses they have on that defense. They're a team that I've watched them sporadically, and every time I make a note, I'm always like, I have to watch more Jags tape. I have to watch more Jags tape. I know.
I've had to force myself to do it the last month, of where I'm like, I'm going to watch them every week, because he's doing, when I tell you it's an amalgamation, it is a melting pot. It's the only thing I think, like, I hope I run into him at the combine, because I just want to tell him, like, dude, what you did this year was amazing. I'm watching Fangio cover 8. Yeah. Then the next play you're running Bengals Hawk from, which is the all up pop out pressures by Flores. Then the next thing I know, you're in wide 9 playing quarters. I'm just like, dude, it's all there.
Yeah.
And
And
so
he's not just like doing it like he's not just doing it just to do it or like throwing
yes.
a bunch of stuff against the wall to see what sticks. Like he's doing a bunch of things, like you said, like from an amalgamation perspective, but he's doing them all like above average to really good. And that's
And doing
insane.
it in the right spots at the right
Yeah.
times, it's all great. And so my point, like with that, to circle back to the topic, is just like,
Sorry, I got excited.
oh
Sorry.
no, I'm the worst. Like I will talk. You can ask my wife. I'll talk football to a wall, and I'll be the weirdo talking to a wall. So, but my point being is like that's really I think where we're looking at. What was so special about McDonald? Like what was different about him and Wink Martindale? Well, Wink Martindale kind of went over pressure and over too into pressure with cover one. Right? Go watch the Falcons. The Falcons have done the same thing. They have a pass rush, but they have no coverage anymore. That's because they've got a 5-man rush and they want to try and play cover one to everybody. And they don't have the horses to do it. So then you look at like what was so special about McDonald. Well, he siloed everything in the Ravens scheme. The Ravens have since Rex Ryan really have had the best scheme in football. They have had the best blitzes and the best way to do it because it was all the big thing with Rex Ryan was BTF, which is blitz the formation. So there were checks within checks. So you could get into different pressures depending on what the offensive presented. And it sounds complex, but it's really not. It's just changing depending on where the opening is. Like, are we to the back? Are we to the tight end? Are we to the nickel? Are we to away? And so you have rules within it. It seems complex. The offense can't figure out what you're doing, but defensively it's super simple. And you can give a million different looks because it doesn't matter what the presentation. Well, McDonald came in and said, hey, there's a better process to do it. There's an easier way of teaching it. Let's simplify it. Maybe not run as much scheme, but we can really be, double down on the Finn Mills. I think if you watch any of the Seahawks tape, they run and they tackle. I think where they're different than like the Texans is that they add scheme into it where it's like, okay, we're going to give you different looks. We're going to try and make you left-handed, but we're also, by the way, really good at fundamentals. And so I think for the Bills, the scheme is there. It works. Look, we are one of the top passing defenses in the NFL. We just can't be 30th in the run defense.
Just don't be deficient. Just be like 18th to 14th. Just be middle of the roadish. That's it.
And I think with a couple of tweaks, I think we saw it. I think I was talking to you before we came on here with the Eagles tape. It's like, look, there was a lot more movement. But then what they were doing is they were moving, but then they were also making sure that second level was moving to their gap. Yes. So it wasn't necessarily like a max blitz, but if you look, they were really trying to cut the front, which all that just means is stunt. Which is not something that they've been doing. I think
their run stunts and their run blitzes were so good. And you'd have like Bosa and whoever was the defensive tackle that is inside, both slanting, but then the linebackers would scrape over and sink, and they're all fit. They're causing, and they would do that on zone runs, but also like pin and pull runs or gap runs that the Eagles are doing and gumming up the whole thing with that little bit of movement. Yep.
Well, and to me, that tells me like, again, we're moving in the right direction. It's at the right time. Like, I think they're figuring out what they can do because again, what do you do? Cause I get asked this by the coaches all the time. They're like, coach, I can't play sit and get. And I've never really, to be honest with you, I've never really been, other than 1 year we had I think it was a state finalist heavyweight wrestler at nose. And we had 2 bad dudes at defensive end at 4-eye. I don't think other than that year, we couldn't play sit and get. So I've always had to be movement based. I think I'm sure there's high school coaches that listen to this and they're like, yeah, I have like 185 pound defensive end. He can't just play box everything, right? I'm going to have to get him to move. I've got a 200 pound nose and I'm going up against a 300 pound center or guard because we're playing the city school. Yeah, I get that. I've been there. So the Bills are kind of in the sense that we have all these really fast guys. What's the best way to do it? You got to move. The problem in the NFL with doing a bunch of stunts is that it gets predictable and you do it. I thought they did an excellent job kind of doing it in the right spots against the Eagles to get some negative plays. And they did it, I think that it kind of surprised the Eagles. I don't think it's something that you become movement based because then that's a different thing. Like the Rams do it because they're all big. across the board, except for probably Byron Young, but everybody else, like Verse doesn't mind just going in and just ear holing the guard and just wrecking shop. You know what I mean? So I think for you guys, I think the pattern is there. So projecting forward, right? What do we need? Probably need to do a little bit more run stunts, but we need to be smart about it, right? We don't want to move too much, but we also can't play sit and get. And I think if you look around the landscape of the NFL, it's about being multiple, but you've already got the passing scheme. It's just fixing that front seven.
Yeah, very well said. And I'm always very interested with it as well, with McDermott's background and like coming from the Jim Johnson tree, but then knowing what McDermott was in Carolina, and then like coming here and really what this Bills defense has been since the second half of the Falcons game, where he kind of took over the defense, and what we've seen from a coverage standpoint. We're starting to get like non-traditional Tampa stuff from them on the back end, which are stuff that they really haven't done a bunch. And he's leaning in a bit more into true 5-man pressures. And it's not just, okay, here's our blitz, but it's really like a sim or a creeper. Right. And it's not like he's getting into more 5-man stuff. They're starting to do like, hey, let's attack the B gap a little bit, which is something the Seahawks do tremendously. And yeah, I'm really interested to kind of see where they go forward, because they've got some pieces. They're just, I feel like they're caught in no man's land a little bit at multiple levels, and also a little bit schematically. And if they can just get a couple tweaks to the interior or the second level or some of that identity, some of that movement piece. Yeah. And also like this offseason is going to be so important for them and interesting and pivotal. And not only that, but the playoff run with whoever they play and what they do. Because there's not, I think what falls in their favor a little bit is there's not one team offensively that has this dominant run game, although massive fingers crossed if they somehow get matched up with the Ravens in the first round. And again, I don't want any part of that for them. I think Robert Mays tweeted out the other day, like Derrick Henry's had the quietest, like 16 touchdowns, like 1,400 yards this year that like no one realizes. Like he's still a monster and can still run even if Lamar's banged up. But there's not this crazy run game present in the AFC, but the Jags can run it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The Broncos have a good offensive line and can run a little bit. And RJ Harvey can break tackles with anybody. So if you're a team that struggles with yards after contact per attempt, that's not really the running back you want to go after or play against. And then not to mention what Sean Payton can do. And then it really comes down to, do you get good Bo Nix or bad Bo Nix? But yeah, it's such an interesting kind of go forward for them in the playoffs and the offseason. And I think so much of what happens in the playoffs either positively or negatively reinforces the direction they go in. And so, yeah, I'm really interested to kind of see what they do, obviously, and with covering this team. But man, this I kept you too long. And so I apologize for that. But this was awesome in every way, shape, and form. Just in case people don't know who you are, what you do, and the awesome work that you put out. The floor is yours. Tell everybody where they can find you, everything that you do. Like I said in the intro, you are one of the preeminent ball knowers in this space, and not just in this space, like in anything. Like I don't think I could come across a person that doesn't respect or acknowledge the work that you do casually or professionally. So the floor is yours. Tell everybody who you are, what you do.
I appreciate it. As you tell, I'm a huge nerd. I just happen to study football as a job. So I'm that kind of a nerd. But no, matchquarters.com is really, if any of this stuff interests you and you want to dive in deep, matchquarters.com is a hub. I've got links to everything, books, anything that you want to do. So if you were like, hey, you mentioned that hybrids book earlier, go to matchquarters.com, click on the books link, go to that. I have a Match Quarters YouTube. So if you're like, hey, I kind of want to wade in, give me some free content first. What's that like? Go to the Match Quarters YouTube. And then obviously you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, wherever you are. I'm usually there too. So I really appreciate you letting me come on and especially talk about, scheme's fun, but a lot of times it comes down to who's on the field and then the fundamental part of it. And I think that's a lot of the things going on with the Bills this year.
Yeah, the Jimmies and Joes and how that functions in with the X's and O's. And yeah, for everybody, if you haven't checked Cody out or know what he does, honestly, you could be a person, and this is where I first came across, you can just Google search a coverage or a football phrase, and there's probably a video on the Match Quarters YouTube breaking it down. Like you could just Google a phrase, go and just look up like odd front. And I bet one of the first things that come up is some video breakdown from the Match Quarters page telling someone exactly what an odd front is, how it works, all the variations, difference versus an over front, and all the things. You can do that with coverages. Yeah, anything and everything. You folks have not checked out Cody's work, Go check that out. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me. This was absolutely awesome. And yeah, I'll see you around Twitter and Blue Sky and all that stuff. And thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on.
One of the best in the business, Cody Alexander. As I said in the intro and the outro there, just sincerely preeminent ball knower. I hate using that phrase because so many people use it seriously and ironically and unironically nowadays, but he is absolutely one of the best and one of the kindest people as well. Go check out the work that he does. He is absolutely phenomenal when it comes to football knowledge, scheme, structure, player evaluation, teaching fundamentals to individual positions, not just the larger picture. He's good at the detail, small level niche things, but also the high level scheme structure stuff. One of the absolute best. I was so pumped to be able to get him on and talk ball with him in this episode of Disguise Coverage. Speaking of the best, One Pie Pizza, the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. If you have not had some, you are sincerely missing out. Sweet sauce pie, cup and char pepperoni. If you get different toppings, they chop them all up evenly and sprinkle them across the pizza evenly. They make their own homemade blue cheese. They make good salads. They have a catering division called Elevated Catering of Buffalo. They do any kind of event that you're rocking. I've had them do several events for me over the past couple of years. The food is phenomenal. And as I always say, this isn't a tagline, but they don't sponsor the show, or I don't say that they're the best because they sponsor the show. They sponsor the show because I think they are the best pizza out there. For those who don't know, I had reached out to some other pizza spots for sponsorship, and One Pie got back to me. I'd never heard of them at the time. They were like, hey, come on down, try our stuff, see what's up, see how you feel. I tried their pizza, and I have not looked back. And they're also tremendously kind people on top of it with all the good that they do for the community, for the city at large. We just got finished with the Toys for Tots drive that they do every holiday season. They've got the partnership with Roswell and trying to knock out cancer. You've got partnering with the Alzheimer's Foundation, the SPCA, just everything they do to try and give back, in addition to making the best pizza in Buffalo and honestly the best homemade blue cheese in Buffalo as well. So if you have not gotten some One Pie Pizza, go treat yourself, treat your taste buds. The season's winding down. Maybe the Bills are making you feel a little bit sad or a little stressed. So feel better, ease some of those stresses and those worries by getting yourself some One Pie Pizza. The online menu can be found in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. I'm going to throw up the banner that says Toodles, folks, because we're going to start to wind down and say goodbye here. I hope you folks enjoyed this episode. If you did, please, here on YouTube, drop a like on this video. Please rate and review and subscribe on the audio podcasting apps or platforms if that is your poison or platform of choice. If you're here on YouTube, turn on notifications for the Disguise Coverage playlist. Subscribe to the Cover One channel as a whole across the board. Tell your family, friends, and loved ones about the show. If you enjoyed it, if you hated this show or you hate me, tell your enemies and try and make them watch this show and try and ruin their day in the process. I hope you folks enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I hope you folks are having a good holiday and are having a good week and have a good new year. I will see you when I see you. And I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. If you are going to the Bills game this Sunday, enjoy it. It's the last one at Highmark / Ralph Wilson / Rich Stadium, a history that is full of history and moments, both good and bad. So, relish in that, cherish that, enjoy the throwback unis, and hopefully a Bills win. We'll see what happens with the playoff seeding and what the go forward looks like. And that'll do it for us in this episode of Disguise Coverage. Check out Cody's stuff if you have not already. Again, Cody Alexander, Match Quarters, Let's Talk Ball podcast. Dude is absolutely phenomenal and amazing in every which way, shape, and form. And again, I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I will see you when I see you. Godspeed. Happy New Year. And as always, go Bills.